Good evening and welcome. I am Edward Queen, and I direct the D. Ebbett Turner Program in Ethics and Servant Leadership here at the Emory University Center for Ethics. On behalf of Emory University and the Center for Ethics, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's panel discussion, Bigger Than a Home Run, the Life and Legacy of Henry Hank Aaron. As we start, I'd like to take a moment to thank people who've been involved to kind of make this event possible tonight, because once we get going, I know I'll pull my typical self and forget, and I don't want to do that. First, I would like to thank Dr. Paul Wolpe, the director of the center, and Ms. Kathy Kenlaw, the associate director, for their ongoing commitment to the center's public programming and to bringing events like this to the wider Atlanta area and now on Zoom beyond. Also want to thank Ms. Jamila Garrett-Bell, project coordinator at the center, a title that does not do justice to everything she does for and for everything she brings to the center. Ms. Allison Keir, our events manager extraordinaire, Ms. Natasha Lebowitz, Assistant Director of Development Advancement and Alumni Engagement, Ms. Christina Johnson, the Assistant Program Coordinator, and fortunately someone who keeps me straight, and Ms. Brianna Quash, our media and communications person. And I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us. Tonight's event exemplifies the missions both of Emory University and the Center for Ethics to bring to a wide public audience serious and reflective programming focused on deepening and extending discussions on how each of us, all of us, can strive to exemplify lives of ethical meaning and commitment. One way of doing that is lifting up moral exemplars. And Henry Aaron, the man who Dusty Baker, Mr. Aaron's former teammate, and actually the man who was on deck when Mr. Aaron hit his record-setting 715th home run, Henry Aaron he described as being the truest, most honest person that I ever knew. Mr. Aaron was such an exemplar. So to honor Mr. Aaron and reflect on his life and legacy, we're joined tonight by an illustrious panel of Atlanta communal leaders. Welcome to have us, Mr. Sidney Barron, General Manager and Managing Partner of Bentley Atlanta, and a former business partner of Mr. Aaron. And for those of you keeping score, an alumnus of Emory University from both its Oxford College and Emory College. Also, Ms. Stacy Key, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council, Georgia's leading authority on minority business development and supplier diversity. Mr. A.J. Robinson, President of Central Atlanta Progress and the Atlanta Downtown Improvement District, and a deeply engaged Atlanta civic leader, and also an alumnus of Emory College. And Mr. Ross Rawson, CEO of Conrad Floyd Communications, a world-renowned portrait painter whose portrait of Maya Angelou hangs in the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, along with 3 other of his paintings. And it was a portrait of Miss Angelou that was chosen to appear on the postage stamp that honors her for the U.S. Postal Service. As you can see with the study behind him, Mr. Rawson also created the statue of Mr. Aaron that sits in Truist Park. So Henry, Hank Aaron, the Hammer. I'm sure each of us encountered him and knew him differently. I had the fortune to meet him just once briefly in passing at a Carter Center event, I believe. But my earliest events of him was watching him play ball on television when I was growing up in Central Alabama as an exceedingly lousy young baseball player with a lifetime batting average of 92, and I was not a pitcher. I did have the good fortune to see him hit this record-setting home run on television. But even at a distance, watching him the way he carried himself, watching his eyes, you knew even then that this was a special man, an admirable human being. So Sid, you probably and arguably knew him best and longest. Please tell us about the Henry Aaron you knew as both a friend and a business partner.
You know, Edward, it's amazing. Most people naturally are going to think of Mr. Aaron, and I've always called him Mr. Aaron, they always think of him in his baseball career, which naturally that makes a lot of sense. That's what's the most visible. But from just a human perspective and from a business leader, there are things that people will never know how interesting, how introspective, how successful he was. Um, Integrity was his number one tenet from any employee, any associate, anyone who even wanted to be around him. If you didn't have a spotless level of integrity, he had very little to do with you. When he approached me to become a business partner of him, I didn't know him. He met me literally on the telephone. We had a meeting, and he said, "I think we should have a team together." And his team being opening a BMW dealership in South Atlanta. He was fortunate that was the very first new BMW dealership opened anywhere in the country in 10 years. And he was the very first African American BMW owner. So again, he was, as president, vice president says, let's be the first, but not be the last. And he was not the last African American BMW owner, but just an amazing person, very encouraging, very thoughtful. I literally went from being a salesperson to a part owner with him and a general manager. And his favorite saying, or my favorite saying of his, is a man's ability is only limited by his lack of opportunity. And Mr. Aaron was there to give opportunities to everyone.
That's a great and important message as we kind of move to my next question to Ms. Key. As Mr. Barron said, first, the kind of role that Mr. Aaron played as a business person, but also his commitment to really thinking about and kind of focusing on people and their need for opportunities to kind of allow people to grow. In your role, tell us about how Mr. Aaron's life as a business person in Atlanta kind of either paved the way or taught lessons to many other business owners.
There is better. Edward, thank you for that. And as I was listening to Sydney.
For some reason, you got muted again, Ms. Key.
Okay, great. Can you hear me now? Okay. And so as I thought about Sydney, as he talked about the dealership and Mr. Aaron being the first BMW, he paved the way for so many things based on that. I lead an organization, as you said, called the Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council, GMSDC, and we connect minority businesses to corporations like BMW to do business. And as a result of that relationship with Mr. Aaron that started many years ago, BMW has become one of the top organizations in engaging suppliers. Not that, there are other African-American owned dealerships today, but throughout all of their supply chain, they take intentional effort to engage minority, Black and brown businesses to do business. And that was part of that foundation that was built as a result of a relationship that they established with Mr. Aaron. They're one of the top organizations today in engaging Black and brown businesses, BMW. They are phenomenal. They have set best practices, they have high standards, but that all started with the relationship they built many years ago with Mr. Aaron. And so when I think about again, Sydney kind of prompted that from me, it was spontaneous, but it made me think about the impact and the dreams that have been fulfilled over the years and the wealth that's been created in communities of color based on that action years ago. And so, yeah, it just kind of takes me back to understand how many dreams and hopes have been fulfilled based on his action and based on his compassion for the community in which he lived. I will tell you, it's impactful, to say the least.
Oh, thank you. That's quite a statement. Yeah, AJ, I was thinking about what Miss Key was saying about relationships, about deep connections in the community. As kind of a major civic leader in Atlanta, what have been your experiences with Mr. Aaron and his work, and his influence and effect both on the community, but even perhaps on you personally?
Thanks, Edward, and thanks for having me today. And I'm thrilled to participate in this. And uh, let me get in this way. Like you said, I grew up in the hills of East Tennessee and actually listened to the radio of games. And when I came down to Emory, my first real connection, believe it or not, to Hank Aaron was I was actually there at the game when he hit the home run. And as an Emory student, I was selling beer uh, to the cold and very windy night, on a cold and very windy night when he hit the home run. So a lot of people say they were there. I actually was there. And but the drinking age was 18, so I don't want to make it look like I was not doing anything illegal. But ever since that night, that what struck me, if you really go back and look at the tape of him running around the bases, it's a very humble run. He's not jumping up and down and yelling and screaming and raising his hand. And that's really, that has struck me from that day, what a humble person. And you asked a question about his effect on the community. I think that, that's it. I mean, his ability to, he did what he did in a very difficult, way, and a lot of people rooting against him. But his whole time frame in Atlanta, as me as an observer in the business community and seeing him at different events and anything, his humbleness in his greatness is really, to me, a lesson that I took to heart, and I think for a lot of people. And look, we lost a lot of humble leaders this past year. C.T. Vivian, John Lewis, they all had this humble character. But Hank achieved so much on that one night and throughout his whole career, just the way he carried himself. And if you go back to look at that tape of him running around the bases, if someone did that you can, when a guy hits a home run in the bottom of the ninth, they jump up and down. It's that same humble walk every time he hit a home run. It's unbelievable. So my observation is really, as a civic leader, is, greatness really was in his humbleness as a icon, really, of American culture.
Thank you, AJ. The issue of icon and humility. Ross, thank you for that wonderful segue to my question to Ross. Ross, I don't want to presume, but I'm going to guess you didn't spend a lot of time watching Mr. Aaron play baseball growing up in Bulgaria. So your encounter with him came later, I assume, as a resident of Atlanta and as an artist. Yeah, one, kind of let us know how you first met Mr. Aaron, and then also your process, your thinking of kind of putting that icon into a statue.
I think right now, in this very moment, when he's not with us in this physical world, I think icon makes more sense than ever. And thinking about him in terms of presence, strong, spiritual, and passionate and focused individual, as far as I'm concerned, he's still here. Through art, through the memories and everything. I met him 10 years ago. I've been very fortunate to know very closely and to be friends with Ambassador Andrew Young and his wife, Carolyn. And on Hank Aaron's birthday, exactly 10 years ago, 2011, on this is February 4th, on the way to a restaurant where 4 of them were to celebrate his 76th birthday. And he just calls me and say, hey, do you mind if you stop by? I want you to meet someone special. I said, okay, sure. I mean, anything coming from you. So here they are at the door of my home. And I live in Atlanta for 20 years, but to this day, I don't understand much baseball. However, I understand great presence, great character when I meet them. Basically, that's my job. So there he is, this amazing, wonderful man, shaking my hand with his wonderful, warm and big hand. Like never before something like this had happened in my life, honestly. It was so impressive. His warmth, his presence, his engaging presence was overwhelming right then and there. And we stayed in the studio for like half an hour. I took a few pictures, started getting to know each other. Eventually, out of this, I made a large portrait of him, and subsequently got accepted in the National Portrait Gallery in the Smithsonian in Washington, one of the 4 pieces I have there. And then later on, we started meeting more regularly because I did another portrait of him for Cooperstown up in New York. And when the Braves approached me in 2016 with the idea of a statue, and I presented it with many other colleagues, I said, listen, I promise you likeness, I promise you character, I promise you to capture his spirit because I've met him, I've known him. I painted also Billy, his wife. So I don't understand baseball, but I understand human nature, and I can relate to him when it comes to struggle, when it comes to overcoming obstacles. You see, I come from a far east, southeast side of Europe, former communist country and everything. So I know a thing or two about coming from different background that is not necessarily everywhere well known, and overcoming different political circumstances, economical, geographical, and all that. So I could relate to him immediately. The wisdom that comes from his eyes, from his presence, from his voice is the wisdom of somebody who's seen hard times. It is impossible to have this from the books or from just the movies or stories. So minor experiences here and there. I saw the struggle in his eyes. So when I promised the Braves, and I'm happy to say they trusted me. They never asked me, hey, have you done before a large-scale statue? Probably the answer would have been no, you're looking at it. But they trusted me precisely because of this promise to get his essence in one piece of art.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, Sydney, if you can come back, I want to turn the next question to you again. AJ kind of alluded to it. What Mr. Aaron had to bear in terms of I hate to use the language of abuse.
Sure.
And Ross also in a different way of, about looking in his eyes and knowing that this was a man who'd gone through hard times and who'd succeeded despite that. I don't want to pry too much, but you knew him. How did he ever talk about that, and how did he kind of reflect on how he bore it, and perhaps even why?
It's interesting, Edward. We never really had that conversation. But within other conversations, within other interactions, you could see where that pain came from and how that pain had been overcome. Because, it's so interesting, and not because clients were being insensitive, but some didn't realize what his background was. I remember distinctly, he and I were just chatting on the showroom floor one day, and a client walked up and said, "Oh, Mr. Aaron, you're such a great baseball player. Where did you play your little league ball?" And he kind of chuckled. He said, "Ma'am, we didn't have little league." He said, "Well, what we did was with rocks and sticks. It just was not the same as it is now." And you could just tell that, she didn't know, but he felt that pain that, kids now have the opportunities that were so foreign and so distant for him that it wasn't even imaginable. And then it translates into the business world. You know, as I mentioned, with us being opening the very first African American owned BMW dealership, this was in 1999. So this was not a long time ago. And when you think that it took that long for this to happen, we were fortunate to meet a gentleman by the name of Vic Doolan. Vic was South African. At the time, he was president of BMW North America. He lived through apartheid. Vic saw the injustice that happened to people that had the capacity to own businesses, to do more, but because of how they looked, who they were, where they were from, they weren't presented with the opportunities. And again, by happenstance, you know, he saw Mr. Aaron being such a good business leader with his restaurant franchises. He was chosen. And, you know, it's amazing how the miracle of serendipity happens at times. And no one better to be the very first African-American BMW owner other than Henry Aaron. And it worked out so wonderfully for him. But it's interesting, you know, we would go out to lunch daily, and he would do little things that would just show you the type of person he was. Naturally, people would always come up, "Oh, Mr. Aaron, how you doing?" You know, a lot of them would call him Hank. He really preferred Henry. And you know, they'd come up and they greet him as though they knew him. He had the absolute perfect greeting for everyone that ever walked up. He would always say, if you gave him your name, Edward, how have you been? How's your family? You'd walk away. And I remember the first time I heard that, I said, "Mr. Aaron," I said, "Do you know that gentleman?" He goes, "Sid, I've never saw him a day in my life." But he was such a human being that he was concerned about everyone. He sincerely would look at you in the face, say, "How have you been? And how was your family?" You know, that is a person who he wanted that same response from you, because he knew the way he grew up. He knew the way that Mobile, Alabama was when he was a child in the 30s and 40s. It's things that, you know, that our children, that, you know, myself as an adult, couldn't even imagine the hardship that he went through. But one thing he did, he put it on the shelf, he moved forward. And as we know now, he is, you know, the icon that he is in athletics and in business.
Thank you so much for that, Sydney. I mean, that says so much, both about Mr. Aaron's kind of commitment to engaging, to kind of engaging with the world, to engaging with people, and also, I mean, there's a risk there. I mean, there's a risk kind of assuming that dealership. And I think there's a lesson there for so many people entering the business world. And I guess, Ms. Key, as you think through this, what are some of the lessons both you try to impart business owners, but even more importantly, perhaps, people who don't see those who actually have businesses and can actually do really good work for them?
You know, we've talked about, Edward, we've talked about a couple of things as we've described Mr. Aaron. We talked about integrity. We talked about courage. We've talked about honor, and that never give up kind of spirit, that no matter what, never give up. And all of those things that Mr. Aaron exemplified are all the kind of things that we're focused on with entrepreneurs. It's not easy being an entrepreneur. There's ups and downs, there's good and bad, but through it all, you persevere through all of it. And I think even through his career, he mentored, and even by setting example for lots of other businesses that have spawned from being connected to him in some way, or they heard him speak, or they had an opportunity to meet him. Or they have had an opportunity, as Sydney, to watch him. He was a graceful, kind man. And he set examples, but by how he conducted himself in business. He was extremely successful. He had 30, I think, up to 30 franchises. He had the dealership. He had other things. And so, but again, we talked about it. It wasn't hard. Nobody handed him something. He worked for it. He worked at it. He worked at being successful, and he set an example for others to follow. whether it be employing people of color in the community, students, his heavy involvement with students and setting an example for students and showing this is the roadmap for success. This is how you do it. And he set that example in how he lived and conducted himself in business. And so those are all the same principles and characters that we're talking about today. Even more so, we're in a pandemic right now. And so you've really got to have that reimagine kind of character, and you've got to have the perseverance because again, it's not easy today. But again, he lived his life in such a way and set such an example of those kind of characteristics.
That's important. There's so much there to kind of begin to build on. I want to take one phrase that you raised, and I think I'll go to AJ and then Ross with both of us and come back. But your description of Mr. Aaron is graceful and kind. That I mean, there's very little that you could say better about any human being in my mind than that. And I guess AJ, for you, how did you experience that? And feel free to go with your show and tell now. But yeah, I mean, give us your thoughts on that component.
Well, I think as everybody's mentioned, he was such a inspirational figure, a tremendous sports hero, a wonderful human being. As he got older and was successful, he made appearances. He was at community things, and he was always the person that somebody wanted to shake their hand. I always just wanted to say I shook Henry Aaron's hand, or I saw him or something. And he always seemed to have a lot of time for people, even, just perfect strangers. A little bit like Tiger Woods is today. There's something about the person that people want to say they saw. So my Forrest Gump moments with, I saw him at many business meetings or things, but my real Forrest Gump moment was I fell in love with Mini Coopers in the about 20 years ago, right after he, I think, got into the business. That BMW bought Mini Cooper, and I had friends who had one said, "Listen, you need to go buy your Mini Cooper from Hank Aaron." I said, "Yeah, you're right." So I went down to the store, and he wasn't there, and the car, I had to order the car, and I asked the guy, "Listen, if I purchase the car, can I get a picture with Mr. Aaron?" And he said, "Well, he doesn't always do it. We'll see," and everything else. Well, I said, "I really want to buy it. I really want the picture more than I want the car." And he said, "Well, okay, we'll see what we can do." So sure enough, I got my picture with the hammer, my show and tell for this evening, you can see. And what struck me about this 30-second interlude with him is, first of all, I had to tell him I was there on the night of the home run. Of course, I knew he would say, everybody says that. I said, no, I was really there, and I really saw it, and I explained it. And he got a good chuckle out of that. But he was, he just had that aura, and when you, as a kid, like you said, Edward, you grew up watching these. Here's someone I grew up listening on the radio. I saw him on that night in April, and here as an adult, I'm buying a car from him. So this was kind of Forrest Gump moments for me. But I guess he was just, my interaction with this hero was, he's a real person. A real person with a real business and a really nice guy, which you don't really think about as a kid. Listen to the radio. You're just interested in hearing Milo Hamilton call it another home run, but he really was just a really genuine human being that we've all been talking about. I subsequently got one more picture for show and tell. I took my kid to a Braves game before they moved to Cobb. And I have my show and tell with my son and Mr. Aaron, and it was the same 30-second interlude that I had behind the car. As nice and friendly. All I did is walk up to him and repeat the same story, that I was there and I bought a car from him. So I needed one more picture for my kid. So, but he was as nice as he could be. And I'm sure it wasn't an act. Everybody will tell you that he did it for everything. And I think that we need more people like this in society. We need our heroes to be real. And I think what made him real is that he did, as Stacy said, as Sydney said, everybody said, that he did overcome so much to be a hero, that he never really forgot who he was and how he got there. And I think he had that ability to relate to just the ordinary person who wanted a picture with their kid.
Thank you, AJ. So Ross, you were given the responsibility, if I may, of communicating that this person, and you promised it to the Braves Corporation. If you don't mind, tell us about what goes through your mind when you're trying to communicate what a person is, especially someone like Mr. Aaron. And I mean, again, so many icons you've painted and done, but someone whose kind of public nature was of the way his was. How do you communicate it, and how do you think about it, and in the process, if at all, how do you interact with the individual as you're getting ready to do this work?
Like I told you earlier, I don't know much about baseball. That's why I took every possible measure to make sure everything about this statue to be as perfect as possible, as accurate as possible, because unlike many pieces of art, public sculpture has millions of critics, and for good reason. Every visitor of the Brave Stadium looks at it, takes pictures in front of it, selfies and all that, and they would notice the tiniest inaccuracy in his pose, the way he swings the bat, the way he holds the bat, and everything. So I've been very thorough, very fortunate to have top professionals around me, including C.J. Stewart, the former Braves player, who has similar stature, who wore Mr. Aaron's jersey and pants and everything, and he was posing for me. He was explaining to me how exactly what is specific about that his swing and the moment of contact. That's what the statue is all about, the bat and the ball. And everything was there in terms of detail. So I covered that. But what about the face? This face right here. What about the spirit, the energy? What about the man behind the icon? What about the reality about him? Like AJ just said, the real man behind the icon. That was really critical. Not only that was my promise, but that was my main concern. And we met several times with Mr. Aaron. He was holding the bat for me. He has a very specific way to hold it. What I've learned later is that actually is inaccurate, quote to quote. It's not the way they teach the kids nowadays, but it was his way of holding the bat, certainly. And it's right, that's the way it is in the statue. But the last and most important thing was the facial expression, not just the physical likeness, not just the energy there, but the very essence of that man, of that real man. What made him real? So I had to ask him the question. I had to ask him the $1 million question. Okay, Mr. Aaron, what were you thinking when you broke the record? What were you thinking in that nanosecond of history? And he answered in a way that I could never possibly forget. One sentence. He said, I was just doing my job. That's it. How about that? How glorious this is, how great this is, and how emotionally charged this is, considering what does that mean for a man like him with a background like his and all that. For all of us, what a message this is. So that's why then everything became so clear. I had this face, like sharply focused on the job, sharply focused on doing what needs to be done, what had to be done in this particular moment. And the rest is what the world knows.
I'm going to follow up with what I know is an unfair question, and a question that many, if not most, artists hate. But that's right. I'm the moderator, so I can ask what I want. Ross, what do you want people to take away from their encounter with that statue?
I would put it in, honestly, one word should describe it best: integrity. To try to understand what, I mean, the statue of Hank Aaron, his presence, his message for generations to come, is the absolute epitome of integrity.
That would be an incredible takeaway for everybody. Yes, Sydney. I'll go back to you with two questions, if you don't mind, as we kind of start to, and I'm going to ask the second question I'm asking Sydney of everybody, so you can start preparing. But the first question, and Ross mentioned it in terms of Mr. Aaron's comments about what was going through his mind when he hit that record-breaking home run. I was doing my job. That communicates a sense of responsibility. It communicates a sense of workmanlike obligation, if in a positive sense. So the first question is how, if you don't mind, how did he manifest that self as someone you worked for, and then there's someone with whom you were a partner? And then the second question, which I'm going to throw to everyone, is what lessons, 1 to 3 lessons, did your knowing Mr. Aaron really impart to you?
Well, let's start with question 2 first. You know, the biggest lesson that I got from him, and again, you know, I knew him for over 20 years, is that whatever success you have in business or in life, personally, whatever it is, make sure that success, make sure that accolade that you receive trickles down to someone else. You know, don't be the person on the pedestal and be the only one there. You know, always be able to reach down and pull someone else with you. You know, one thing that he had at the dealership, and a lot of people were extremely surprised to walk to the showroom and see him there, because we literally moved his office from Turner Field down to the dealership in Union City. Wasn't a very far drive. From the dealership to the stadium was maybe 15, 20 minutes. But when we built the dealership, and he said to me, Sid, I'm going to put my office at the dealership. I said, Mr. Aaron, are you sure? I said, are you going to ever be there? He says, no, I'll be there with you every day. And he was literally at the dealership when he wasn't traveling or taking care of Braves business, because at the time he was still vice president of the Braves for player development. So he was a very busy person. But he made a conscious effort to be at the dealership. And a lot of people also don't realize that was one of 7 dealerships that he owned. So we had not only BMW and Mini in Union City, McDonough, we had Toyota, we had Honda, we had Hyundai, and in Augusta, we had Jaguar and Land Rover. And naturally, he'd spend most of his time at BMW because I was closest to home. He wasn't big on traveling because he traveled so much while he was playing baseball. But he would make an effort to make it to all the dealerships and to let people know that his name was not a name strictly on a building. Right. He was the owner. He was the operator. It was his business, and he cared about the business. Most, you know, you read the horror stories that people say, oh, well, I didn't know I was running broke. I didn't know I was going out of business. Well, no, he knew everything about the business, but he was such an intelligent and insightful person that he said to me, he said, you know, I don't know about the car business. I know about business. That's why I want you to teach me, and I'll learn from you. And to have a person like that look at you and tell you that they want to learn from you, it's very, very, very humbling. But the biggest lesson he taught us all, anyone that came in contact with him, was as you improve yourself, make sure you help someone else. Make sure that person helps someone else. Because then, the humanity can flow from you down to other people and just make everything so much better for all of us. And that's the person that he was.
Thank you. Stacy, what about you?
I want to go back to Ross, what Ross said. Mr. Heron said, I was just doing my job when he hit that home run. And just think about him just doing his job and the impact he had on doing his job. So he created hundreds of jobs. He built generational wealth and launched many careers and business ventures just by doing his job every single day. As Sydney said, he showed up at the dealership. That was his home base because he wanted to be with the people at the dealership, touching their lives on a day-to-day basis. And so I think about, if I could have that intentional impact in all that I do, just doing my job every day, what impact would individuals have in this world? It really just, I'm just in awe of the impact he had by just doing his job, and then taking that same spirit and touching other lives and rippling that impact by just doing my job. I'm not doing extra. I'm just doing my job.
Amen.
Getting up.
Hmm.
It's incredible. So that's the thing I take away is, how can I do my job every day and have impact and change other people's lives for the better?
Right.
For the better. Wow.
Yeah, that's important. You kind of take off, even, his role as vice president of player development kind of expanded into really everything he did, because it was really about developing people, about developing lives, about developing opportunities.
Exactly correct.
That's a powerful, powerful, powerful lesson.
Mhm.
What about you, AJ? Oh, you're muted, AJ. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. I would characterize it this way. I'd agree with everything that's been said. This is just, to me, the finest example of leadership in a leadership of action, of talent, of lifestyle, of culture. There's this famous saying, I'll butcher it, by Margaret Mead, about never underestimate what a small group of committed people can change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. This was one person who, in my mind, is a great example of somebody that really, if you knew him and you really understood his life and his accomplishment and his with all the characteristics we've been saying, this is just a fantastic way of a leadership that, to me, can change people. And he never, I think he used his success as an athlete in a way that a lot of people don't. You could, there's other people like that. You could say President Carter used the presidency to, do so much good in his post-presidency. But a lot of people just do their thing and that's it. And I think that type of commitment, doing his job, helping others, doing it in a humble way, incredible character, is just, to me, is all about leadership and using your skill set to lead a full and meaningful life. And I think that's what I take away from someone like Henry Aaron.
Thank you, AJ. That's important, right? Leading, thinking about what it means to be a leader, thinking about what it means to be responsible in doing your job. I was thinking about Ross's comments about not knowing anything about baseball, and actually, the humility to kind of actually have to learn the technique, just as Sydney was kind of talking about Mr. Aaron's willingness to kind of acknowledge, I don't know the car business. You're going to teach me the car business, right? The kind of lack of presumption. I mean, even as he kind of as he entered baseball, he kind of had to kind of work on adjusting his way he held the bat, even though it, as Ross said, it never became the right way. It did seem to work for him. Ross, what about the lessons of his life, of working with him, of working on the statue, that you took away?
You see, you can study good paintings, good works of art, and you could try to understand them, try to read them. But the simple truth is, great works of art and masterpieces actually study you. They read you. I hope that makes some sense. The same with great people like Mr. Aaron. We try to understand him, but we will probably never fully understand him. But what happens when you get close to him, one way or another, all of us, one way or another, get close to him, touch his essence, and live briefly in his presence, the same magic happens. His being is reading you. His very personality is like a beautiful, wonderful, magical mirror where you could see yourself at your possible best. He evokes the best in you. And it's a lesson, of course, but what I'm amazed about after being with him a few times and doing what I'm doing about him is precisely this: the understanding of who am I actually in when you put things in perspective. And the biggest lesson is probably stop blaming everything and everybody around you. Stop blaming the circumstances. In my case, the former communist country, the Far East, the corner of Europe, overcoming all kinds of obstacles in order to come to this country, in order to make a name, in order to establish myself and all that. It's going to take a week to tell you the whole story. And I can tell you dozens and dozens and dozens of unfortunate things that made my life quite difficult to come to this point. But just like him, I'm trying, more or less successfully, to forget about everything and everybody and just do what I need to do it to the best of my ability, and that's it, and impact people's lives. Trust in yourself. I mean, like almost like a religious feeling, religious trust in your tremendous ability to overcome obstacles and shine and be glorious despite the difficulties. Of course, we have to fight the injustice. Of course, we're fighting injustice every day around the world, here and around the world. But the fight needs to start with the mirror, with the person in the mirror, like great Michael Jackson said once. That's honestly, if I would give an example to my children or anybody else, who would be the greatest example of this kind of transformation, this kind of self-confidence and self-trust, that would be Mr. Aaron.
So the issues of development, this issues of opportunity, this issues of getting a sense of what one can do. I want to come back to that in just a minute. I'm going to say one thing. Please, those of you in the audience who have questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A. We already have one. But as we get ready to turn it over to the questions from our viewers, I sound like I'm on television. Anybody have what might be any of your closing remarks that that I failed to elicit in my questioning?
You know, I've got to just tell you one funny thing about Mr. Aaron. You know, he had an amazing sense of humor, and you had to be close to him to really understand his humor. He didn't do very well with sarcasm, so it was pretty direct humor. But I was with him one day, we were going to lunch, and he said something that to me at the time was so simple, but it was so, it was him, and it was so impactful. A young man ran up to him and he said, Mr. Aaron, you know, you're the greatest baseball player ever. You know, you hit so many home runs. How did you hit so many home runs? And Mr. Aaron looked at me, looked at him, looked back at me, looked at him and said, well, you swing the bat. So that was his essence. His essence was, don't complicate life. Don't complicate things. If you do the right things all the time, guess what? The result happens. And when he said that, I thought to myself, was that funny or was that a lesson? And it was kind of both.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're swinging the bat.
That's it. You just swing the bat.
Yeah, Stacy. Yeah, both about swinging the bat and also kind of revisit the question about the lessons which you addressed to some extent. What are the things you want our listeners to take away from tonight?
You know, the thing, and I think about what Sydney just said, but Mr. Aaron had the courage to swing the bat, and in many areas. And so, as we think about entrepreneurship, and again, that's my area of expertise. I think the message I would say is having that courage to swing the bat, to step up to the plate, and then not relenting. Sometimes while he hit the home run, he swung the bat many times before that.
Yes.
But he didn't stop along the journey. He persevered, he continued. And so I would say, don't stop along the journey. Have the courage to keep getting up and taking the swing at the bat. That would be my message. Yeah, you can't stop halfway. You got to keep going. If you're gonna get there, keep persevering, keep on the journey until you get there. And so the courage to step up to the plate.
Thank you. So AJ, your takeaways for the audience.
Well, one thing we haven't mentioned, like many people, Mr. Aaron wasn't from Atlanta. He moved here. He had a wonderful athletic career here, but he really did care deeply about Atlanta. And you see that in the not only commitment to business, but I know he's politically involved, supported he cared. He still cares about the Braves his whole career. And there's something about that type of leadership as well that I think we take away from. There's a number of individuals like him who had success somewhere, or success in business, or success in the arts, or something, but also were committed in a civic way that didn't have anything to do with their original career, or was it a continuation of his career? Because he made appearances. He's in I don't know how many promotional films about Atlanta, and he really did cared very deeply about our community.
Yeah,
and I think that's the kind of thing that makes the civic world go here. And there's a lesson in that for everybody, that there's more than just your own. As Stacy said, it's more than just a job and going to work every day. There's a big world out there that called Atlanta, that or however you define your world, that you need to care about. And he did, and that showed through just about everything he did.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Now, the issue of commitment, this issue of identity, this issue of kind of realizing that one's immersed in a wider universe, and how one takes the opportunities that have been presented to oneself, or in his case, the opportunities he created through his life, to really enliven and to improve a community is an important lesson, I think, for all of us to reflect upon, right? I mean, you can talk about it tritely about giving back, but really there's something deeper and much more powerful than that we really need to think about. And really, it's about kind of growing our world together in a better place, in a better direction. Ross, do you have a takeaway from your experience?
I see we have questions coming and not much time left, but real quick, you see, I'm acutely aware of the fact that painting, sculptures, they last for centuries and they carry this energy of the sitter for generations to come to see it and enjoy it. That being said, for me, Hank Aaron, Mr. Hank Aaron is with us, and he will always will be with us and after us for generations to come. Through what he did, through his legacy, through his legend. So it's only our job to keep that legend fresh and as amazing as it is. So great opportunity today to be able to share this. And I've learned a lot today, honestly. It's been wonderful.
One quick question from the audience, and either Sydney or AJ may be best positioned to answer that, and maybe you, Stacy. Mr. Aaron's foundation and his commitment to education. How did he talk about that, and how did he kind of move in that direction, if you may?
You know, Edward, at the dealership, one thing that Mr. Aaron saw very quickly was the lack of diversity on our technical side. So technicians in most automobile dealerships do very, very well financially, especially the further up the scale you go. And with BMW, you have young men, young ladies who are technicians that can make six-figure incomes. And Mr. Aaron just said to me one day, he says, I'm just curious, why are there not more ladies? Why are there not more African-American technicians? And, you know, that brought about a question that I just couldn't answer. So he, at the time, he said, well, let's go over to Atlanta Area Tech. I had no idea why he wanted to. He said, let's put together a program. Let's look at their automotive program and let's commit to hire their top 2 graduates each year to train to become BMW technicians. Now, I went further than that. So all the candidates would come interview with us. He picked the top 2, but he took it a step further. He paid for their first year of technical training. He bought them their very first toolkit, which a automotive toolkit to repair BMWs can cost upwards of $4,000 to $5,000. Oh, wow. He said, here's the catch. I'll pay for your school. I'll buy your toolkit, but you owe me 1 year of service. If they left within that first year, he kept the tools. We didn't have a single person leave. And we had that dealership for 8 years. And over an 8-year period of time, we hired 16 technicians from Atlanta Area Tech. It was phenomenal.
I'm gonna take probably one last question, and don't want to presume on people's time, but since a longtime colleague has asked the question, and I don't want to disappoint Robert Franklin, because all the way back when we were in graduate school together, though he was a much older contemporary of mine. Robert kind of raises a really important point, that one of the things we perhaps take away from great leaders is how they deal with failure when things didn't work well. And I guess, Sydney, you may be best positioned to answer this. Any kind of reflections on how bumps in the road, or even kind of tremendous ditches that Mr. Aaron had to address, especially after leaving baseball?
Well, you know, it's interesting. When we opened the dealerships, number one, we received a lot of concern, a lot of flack from industry insiders that said, what does Hank Aaron know about the automotive business? Well, you know, that was kind of settled after we were open for just 90 days and the dealership was flourishing. Everything wasn't all rosy. We opened up a Jaguar and Land Rover dealership in Augusta. Augusta is a wonderful community. I actually moved my family there when we opened the dealership, but we did too much too soon in a small community. Mr. Aaron realized that very quickly, and he and I met over it. I mean, toiled over it. He said, Sid, you know, you've done all you can do. I've done all I can do. It's time for us to cut it loose. So he was not a person to give up easily, but he was a person that saw where there was an opportunity and where there was an opportunity to make an exit and do it properly. The other thing he did, and I'll just say this very, very quickly, is we all know what happened in 2008 with the banking collapse, with the real estate collapse. In 2007, and I don't know how this happened, he came to me, came to our other partners, and he kept saying, guys, it's time for us to divest. I think it's time for us to sell the dealerships. We were all, you know, Mr. Aaron, we're growing so quickly, things are going so well. He says, no, guys, I've got a feeling. I think we need to sell the dealerships. We sold the last dealership November of 2007, and then 2008 happened. So, you know, was it by chance, by luck, by, you know, some glorious intervention? However it happened, here's a man that people question, does he know about the automotive business? He saw the downturn happening. We exited, and as I said, the rest is history.
Mhm.
You know, to kind of close on that, because you know, my friend of mine, Ronald Heifetz, who teaches leadership at the Kennedy School, always talks about, you know, one of the keys about a great leader is the ability to read the environment.
Mhm.
And to read the environment and recognize it. Recognize when something's not working, as you did with the Jaguar Land Rover leadership dealership, and recognize when the time to keep going no longer is there. And having both the courage to take the best step and the humility to realize that there's just some realities you can't overcome.
Sure.
You just have to manage. And clearly, Mr. Aaron has managed a wonderful career as a baseball player and an unbelievable influence on so many people's lives as an exemplar of both the kind of person we should all aspire to be, and one that he's demonstrated to so many who came into contact with, the kind of person he was. So I want to thank you all again for your willingness to join us tonight, and thank all the audience for joining us. And I hope you will attend more events from the Center for Ethics. Everybody have a pleasant evening. Be well and follow the rules. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.